Hey everybody, and welcome to Ape Nation, your number one source for all things Planet of the Apes on YouTube. My name is Josh, and today I am doing something that I have been wanting to do before I even officially started this channel last year, and that is a compare and contrast video between two of the franchise's most iconic characters, Caesar and Caesar. Before we get started, if you like what I do here and want to show your support, be sure to hit the like button on this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so that you can stay up to date on all things apes. These are two of, if not my two favorite characters in the entire Planet of the Apes franchise, and honestly, just two of my favorite movie characters in general. And due to the fact that they are essentially two different versions of the same core character, I thought breaking down who each one of them is and comparing and contrasting the two of them would be a lot of fun. How this is going to work is I'm going to take a look at 6 key elements of each version of the Caesar character: the origin, the character design, performance, story, their symbolism, and their endings. For each one, I will discuss each character, compare the differences and similarities if there are any, and then tell you who I think did it better. I will then go over what my personal favorite moment from each character is, and then finally at the end I will give my opinion on which version of the Caesar character I prefer and why. So with all of that out of the way, let's get started. So when it comes to the origin story of the Caesar characters, I want to start things off with Roddy McDowall's version of the character. So Roddy McDowall was a character who was born out of tragedy by two time-traveling smart apes, Cornelius and Zira. As we know, he was raised in secret until he is forced into an ape management control center where he is treated like a slave like all other primitive apes at the time. He's forced to hide his intelligence until it's no longer possible and starts rallying other apes to his side to eventually revolt against slavery and start a revolution. Then, on the other side of the table, we have Andy Serkis's version of Caesar. This is a character who was born from a lab ape with intelligence. His mother was given a drug, the ALZ-112, that transferred to him when he was born that gave him his intelligence. He was raised by humans, and up until a certain point in his life believed he was one, until he's hit with the harsh reality that he is not a human and he is an ape, as he experiences animal cruelty once he's sent to the ape sanctuary. And it's there that he uses his intelligence to start a revolution and create smart apes to join his side. So when it comes to Andy Serkis, I think the thing that really sticks out about his version of the origin story is just how grounded in more of a realistic world that it is. It's much more grounded in science and modern day science and things that we can relate to, like trying to find the cure to Alzheimer's. It's also a really heartfelt underdog story in a way, and something that I've always loved about it that I haven't talked much about on this channel is that it takes aspects of Roddy McDowall's origin, more of the revolution side of things, but it does its own thing with it. It tells it in its own unique way, and I've always really appreciated that. And then speaking of Roddy McDowall, when you look at his version of the character, there's a very creative aspect to it that you don't quite have in the same way with the Andy Serkis version of the character, in that being that the way that the character was actually created through the time loop, through what happened with Escape from the Planet of the Apes and what happened with Cornelius and Zira, in that the story was forced into a way where they had to get creative. They had to find a way to continue the story forward, despite the fact that the Earth was destroyed, despite the fact that Cornelius and Zira were gone. And I think the way they did it was just so impressive. You also have to look at the tone of the two stories. I think when you look at the tone of Caesar's origin story in Rise of the Planet of the Apes versus Roddy McDowall's version in Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, Conquest, I think, is much darker with the way that it presents Caesar as a character and how it originates his story. Whereas Andy Serkis's version of the character, I think, while it definitely is dark at times, it's much more of a hero's journey-esque type of story. It has a bit more heart, and it's much more of a almost coming of age story in a way. Whereas Roddy McDowall's version is much darker, it's much more real, it's much more violent, and despite the fact that it's a bit sillier in its concept, it really leans into the darkness while also leaning into the wackiness of it all. So when it comes to the overall origin story, who do I prefer? I know I might get some flack for this one, but I gotta say, I prefer the Roddy McDowall origin story. There are definitely aspects of the Andy Serkis version that I'm going to talk about throughout the rest of this video that I do prefer that version, but when it comes to the origin story, I just think there's a real cleverness, there's a real originality and impressiveness to what they were able to achieve with the original version. I think that dark edge of it all, I think, is just always stuck with me with that version of the origin of the character. And as much as I love how they were able to pull off Caesar's origin in Rise of the Planet of the Apes with Andy Serkis's version, I think I've always just leaned a little bit more towards liking the way that he came about in Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. So that is why for origin, I'm going with Roddy McDowall. So when it comes to the character design, the overall visual look and way that the character is designed, again, I'm going to start with Roddy McDowall's version of the character. And of course, the biggest difference between the two of the characters right off the bat is that one is done with performance capture and CGI, and the other is done with makeup. And Roddy McDowall's, of course, is the one is done with makeup and prosthetics. Now, something I really love and have always admired about the Planet of the Apes, the original series, is that prosthetic makeup, and that continues in Conquest of the Planet of the Apes with Roddy McDowall's version of Caesar. I think the ape makeup for him still holds up, and it has a great overall look. I really like the design of Caesar. I really like the way that his overall look comes across. I think it has a perfect blend of young adult with a bit of intensity and a bit of intelligence as well, all thrown into one. That paired with Roddy McDowall's eyes, which I'll talk about later when it comes to performances, I think creates a look that's really memorable. That being said, one big thing about him that I've always really not been a fan of, and it's kind of understandable why they went this direction, but it also feels a bit cheap, is that the facial design, for the most part, is very much just a copy and paste of Cornelius, but with a couple slight tweaks and longer hair. And I understand why they did it. Of course, that is to make sure that it's clear that he is the son of Cornelius, but I think they could have gone a bit more different with his look. That being said, I still do like the overall look. Now, when it comes to Andy Serkis's version of the character, of course, like I said, this is CGI. It's done with performance capture. There's no makeup, there is no prosthetics. And this is a whole other conversation when it comes to CGI versus makeup and practical effects. I think both of them have their place. I'm not one of these people that just says, no, practical is better, no, makeup is better. And I'm also not one of these people that just says, no, CGI is always better. What's new is better. You know, I think both of them have their place, both of them have their time, and both can be utilized very well. I think this is a case where CGI was the right direction. I think the CGI design of Andy Serkis's Caesar is incredible, and I think Andy Serkis's version of the character, I think, is physically a bit more appealing and a bit more realistic, of course, just because of the fact they were modeling him after more realistic apes, what apes really look like. But while doing that, they also found a way to make him look a bit more human. They found a way to utilize Andy Serkis's eyes and his overall facial structure to make you feel that he is human. There's an element of him that you can empathize with him, despite the fact that he looks like a very realistic chimpanzee. And then also, I think his look is just a bit more iconic overall. I think when you look at images of him from Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, especially with the war paint, I think those are really striking, really memorable, and really iconic images, which I think do top pretty much anything when it comes to the visual look and aesthetic that we ever got from Roddy McDowall's Caesar, as much as I do like his look. So when all is said and done, while I think both have their place and I think both do what they're trying to do very well, I think that the design and what they were going for and how they were able to achieve it with the CGI of Andy Serkis's version is better. And so for character design, I'm going with Andy Serkis. Now, as for the performance given by each actor, Andy Serkis and Roddy McDowall, again, I'm going to start with Roddy McDowall. And when it comes to his acting in specifically Conquest, and to a bit of a lesser extent in Battle, because he is, of course, still in Battle, but I think the bulk of what is so memorable about this version of the character is in Conquest, which is why I'm mainly speaking on that film. And so getting into his performance, I think something that really sticks out about Roddy McDowall is his human physicality. I think it really sticks out when you look at all of the apes around him, in that he's able to portray an ape who's learned to walk and talk and move like a human, but he is still an ape. And I think that's a big part of the performance that doesn't get enough credit, is that he's able to ride this fine line with the way he moves between ape and human. And that's something I've always really liked about him physically. And then also, I think he's very loud and he's very commanding of the screen anytime he's on screen. And I think that goes a long way to getting you to care about him and getting you to really emotionally empathize with him and not being able to take your eyes off of him. And speaking of eyes, and this is something that he shares very much in common with Andy Serkis's version of the character, there's such a heavy reliance on his eyes. His performance really hinges a lot on how he uses his eyes to express emotion, and the same can be said for Andy Serkis's version of the character. And I think that's something that makes the performance of both of them stand out so much and be so loved as they both have become. I think the expressiveness from both of these actors is really something to behold, and I think it goes a long way in, again, making you able to attach to them in an emotional way and able to empathize with them and understand them and know where they are emotionally in every single scene. And that's something I think that both of them do very well. And then especially when done through makeup, it's really impressive what Roddy McDowall was able to do. I think that, again, going back to how he uses his eyes and also just how he uses his voice and how he uses those little sounds that he makes, I think it really goes a long way in the visual expression and the overall expression of how he's presenting himself on screen and how he brings that performance out and transfers it into the character. Now, getting into Andy Serkis's version of the character, I think it's a much more subdued performance. I think when you look at him throughout the trilogy, it's a lot quieter of a performance, but he's very explosive when he needs to be. You have those moments, like of course in Rise of the Planet of the Apes when he finally speaks for the first time, or in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes when he yells at the humans to go, or in War for the Planet of the Apes when he has those fits of rage. You know, he's quiet and he's very subdued, and I think Andy Serkis does a great job at pulling that off, and it really adds to that sternness of the character in a way. And I also think that Andy is just given a bit more to do in that regard. He's able to flex that acting muscle a bit more. And again, like I said, he's able to rely on his eyes in that regard as well. And then I think something that really sets Andy Serkis apart that very few other actors are able to do, at least until the last 10 or so years, was he was able to take something, a technology with performance capture, and transcend it. He was able to take the concept of performing in a motion capture suit and being turned into a CGI character and give a performance that isn't just, oh, it's a great performance capture performance. No, he's giving a great performance. It's just a great character and a great acting role, which is something that of course can be said for Roddy McDowall as well. You know, you look at all the great performances that are done behind makeup and in costumes and with prosthetics over the last several decades, and Roddy McDowall is of course among them, but I think what Andy Serkis does transcends the mold. It transcends what was able to be done at the time, and honestly still is able to transcend now, with performance capture still being something that's very new and very revolutionary for filmmaking. Andy Serkis's version of the character is also just, again, given more to do as a character overall, which allows him to go a bit further with his performance. He's able to have more of those explosive moments, have more of those quiet moments, have more of those emotional moments, and is able to tap into the depth of the character more. And so while I think Roddy McDowall's performance is iconic in his own way, and I think he has some of those incredible moments where you see the expression on his eyes, you see the rage in his face, you hear in his voice how powerful he can be, I think the same can be said for Andy Serkis and then some. I think he takes that ball and he goes even further down the court. I think he's able to just take what Roddy McDowall did, but go even bigger and go even better with it. And that is why when it comes to performance from the actor, I'm once again going with Andy Serkis. So when it comes to the story overall, from beginning to end, for both versions of the Caesar character, they kind of tell a very similar story when you look at it in just kind of a broad strokes kind of picture. They are both essentially the story of an orphan who becomes a revolutionary and eventually, in different ways, a messiah for the future of ape kind. And I think it's really cool that they both tell that story, but tell them in very different ways. You look at the Andy Serkis version of the character, and that story is told over the course of 3 movies, with each movie being a significant chapter and a significant part of his arc. You have his rise to being a leader, then you have him learning lessons and being humbled a little bit, and then in the 3rd chapter in Wars, where he rises to that Moses-like status. Whereas with the Roddy McDowall version, his story is told over 2 films, and the large majority of it is told in the first half, in Conquest, and that is where his rise to being a leader takes place. And in the second chapter, and I'll get to why this is a bit of a hindrance for him in a second, but it is less so about an arc for him and the world that he shaped following his rise to leadership in Conquest, and how that all eventually wraps up and establishes him as that similar type of Moses figure for the future of ape civilization. In Rise, Dawn, and War, I think the story that Caesar goes through has so many multi-layered arcs that he has to journey through, and a lot of complex relationships that are introduced and weaved in and out of it with other characters by his side who come in, come out, and are a part of this big story, and they all affect his character in a really meaningful and impactful way. Whereas in Conquest, with Roddy McDowall's version of the character, the story is mostly limited to just one movie. Of course, you have Battle as well, but with Battle, there isn't a whole lot of growth beyond what we know of Caesar in Conquest. You know, he's a bit more mellowed out in Battle, he's a bit older, he's a little bit wiser, and of course we see him have some new relationships introduced, like the relationship with his son, or the relationship with his wife, or the relationship with characters like Virgil, but none of those relationships are really given the same level of depth or complexity or development that the relationships, say, between Caesar and Koba, or Caesar and Blue Eyes, or Caesar and Will, or Caesar and Maurice, and any of these other characters throughout Andy Serkis's version of the story. And so a big hindrance to Roddy McDowall's version of the character when it comes to his story is that the most interesting part of it is the beginning and that first half of it, and beyond that, it never really gets that interesting again. And so I think while Roddy McDowall does have great aspects to his story that gets told over those two movies, they are limited for the most part to the first movie, and they don't really get a whole lot of development beyond that in the second movie. Whereas Andy Serkis's version, I think it's a very well fleshed out story from beginning to middle to end, and that is why for me, when it comes to the story that is being told with the character, I am going to once again go with Andy Serkis's version of Caesar. And now we get to symbolism for the character of Caesar. And this is something that I think is really interesting about both, in that they're both very much and very obviously modeled after both historical and mythical leaders, and their stories are inspired by that as well. And I think when you look at Roddy McDowall's version of Caesar, I think it's a very clear homage or inspiration and parallel to someone like Malcolm X, a civil rights leader from the 1960s. When you look at that movie, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, and the methods of Malcolm X and the achievements and what he was going for, I think it's very clear that that version of Caesar is inspired by what he did and what he stood for. And then when you look at Andy Serkis's version of the character, it's much more about the biblical epic nature of it. It's about the achievements that a character like Moses did for his people to guide his people to freedom. Specifically in the third movie, we get to see the bulk of that take place, and where we get to see him really come into his own as that Moses-inspired figure. And that's something that I think has always been one of the most fascinating elements of both versions of the character, is how they are inspired by these types of figures and how they are utilized through their writing to tell their individual stories. It's not something that's necessarily unique to storytelling, but it is very much unique to both versions of the Caesar character in the Planet of the Apes franchise when compared with other characters. And at the end of the day, I think both of them do this very, very well. Both utilize that inspiration and utilize that symbolism in a way that moves the story forward and moves the characters forward and develops them well and makes them even more interesting. And so truthfully, I don't really pick either side. I think that Andy Serkis's version of the character utilizes that aspect very well, but I think that Roddy McDowall's version utilizes it just as well. And I think both of them take this idea of symbolism through each of their inspirations, and it's something that impacts the character in a positive way on both accounts. And so that is why when it comes to the symbolism behind each character, I'm going to go ahead and say it is a tie between Andy Serkis and Roddy McDowall's version of Caesar. And now finally we get to the ending of the characters of Caesar. And I think both of them have a lot going for them. And I think the ending for both the Roddy McDowall and the Andy Serkis version of the character are handled very well. I actually think they're, for the most part, very satisfying endings to their respective stories. Andy Serkis's version of the character is killed from a battle wound that happens earlier, a few scenes prior to the end of the movie, and has his final scene with Maurice on that hilltop. It's a beautiful final moment where he has finally achieved his goal and gotten all of his apes to freedom. Then then when you look at Roddy McDowall's version of the character, he learns a bit of a lesson, and then it cuts forward to after his death. His death happens off screen, but we end with a statue of him that commemorates his memory, commemorates what he did for Apes, and it ends with that little tear that falls down. And I think there's a real beauty in both of these endings. And I've actually went back and forth on this one, and so I wasn't really 100% sure where I fell on this one, because I think when you look at Andy Serkis' version of the character, it definitely feels like a bit more of a triumph. It definitely feels like a bit more of a bow tie on a really nice story that takes you through a journey from beginning all the way to the end. When you look at Roddy McDowall's ending, it's a bit more of a somber note. Not that Andy Serkis' death isn't somber, but I think it has a bit more of an open-endedness to it in what it actually means and what the future of this world is going to be. It's a bit bigger than just the death of Caesar and just the end of Caesar's character. And for that reason, I'm also going to give a tie to the ending for both versions of Caesar. I think both versions have their place, and I think both are able to achieve something that's meaningful. And despite the fact that I don't think Battle for the Planet of the Apes is a good movie, and I don't think that Caesar is very well developed in it, I do think that ending is really powerful, and one of the best moments of the movie is that final scene with the statue. And to contrast that with actually seeing Caesar's death and having that be a really powerful moment, I think is really cool that we have both those types of wrap-ups for this character. And so that is the reason that I'm going to go ahead and give it a tie when it comes to the ending of both versions of the Caesar character. So which version of Caesar do I ultimately prefer? Which version of the character do I think is the best one? While I do have a lot of respect, and I will always have a special place in my heart for the Roddy McDowall version of the character, I love what he goes through in Conquest. I think he's a really memorable character, and he remains one of my all-time favorites in the Planet of the Apes franchise. I think, for me personally, it has to be Andy Serkis' version of the character. I think overall, he is just a better developed and also better acted character from start to finish. I think his development throughout his story, throughout Rise, Dawn, and War, it's a more grounded, more expansive story, and the storytelling makes his character just all that much more memorable. And I think what he also is able to do is take the idea and take the concept of what Roddy McDowall's version of Caesar was and what they were going for with that character, but it realizes it to its fullest potential that just wasn't possible in 1972, and it just wasn't possible with where they were in the continuity when making those movies. And so there's even more I could say about both versions of the characters, and I do love them both, but if you're asking me who my favorite is, who do I prefer, it has to be Andy Serkis' version of Caesar. So guys, that was my video breaking down the two different versions of the Caesar character, comparing them, talking about their differences, their similarities. But I want to know what you have to say. I want to know which version of Caesar that you prefer. I want to know if you agree with any of my points. Do you disagree with any of them? Let me know all of your thoughts down below. But until next time, thank you so much for checking out today's video here on Ape Nation. If you liked this video, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so that you can stay up to date on all things apes. I'll catch you in the next one, so until then, goodbye.